You're listening to the Yoga Medicine Podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Land. This podcast brings you information and resources to enhance the therapeutic effects of your practice based on a deeper understanding of anatomy, physiology, and the integration of modern science and research with traditional practices and experiences. Join me and my co-hosts Tiffany Cruikshank and Katya Bach as we dive into all things yoga, research, and wellness. Hi, Marnie. Welcome back to the Yoga Medicine Podcast. Thank you so much for making time for us again.
Hi, Rachel. Oh, it's so great to be here. Just really love this community.
Yeah, me too. And I love this topic as well. It's something that I think has really been growing in people's appreciation of it. Recently, people are kind of getting curious about pain and their preconceived notions of pain. I should kick off by saying anyone who hasn't listened to episode 15, Shifting Persistent Pain, might start there. You don't need to, but it's an interesting kind of precursor and covers some of the foundations of pain science. And we spent the time mostly talking about therapeutic pain care, creating more enjoyable life experiences for people who are living with persistent pain. And today we're maybe looking at the opposite side of the spectrum about what we can learn from pain science to improve our performance.
Yeah, I think that kind of knits together beautifully
Mm.
things that make me get all fluttery inside, which is, how do I take my worlds of, working with clients and patients who are really in deep suffering from their persistent pain.
Mm.
And then sometimes what feels like maybe the opposite end of the spectrum of like the athletes and people who are just really physically driven in their life through recreation and how they perceive and work through the messages that come through their body. And sometimes that feels like pain and sometimes it feels like discomfort. And then I think for me, like really recognizing, that's the root of what brought me to yoga is kind of bringing those things together into this place of true internal awareness, which is that like each of these experiences are, we can follow patterns through science, but in the end, they're so very unique to the individual. And so then I kind of look at it and go, oh, so do we have these spectrums or do we actually have this big circular, always moving dynamic entity, right?
Yeah.
And it just might be where we are in each phase at that moment in time. And I just think of it as like, okay, so what can I learn myself when I'm
Mhm.
maybe more in that place of feeling like I'm stuck and suffering, or when I'm out there, like really like, oh, yes, I made it, like whatever my physical goal is, and how can I bring each one of those experiences into like kind of finding that equanimity of life and performance and living in
Yes.
this body of mine.
Oh, you said that beautifully because that is yoga, isn't it? Is the bringing together of that which was never truly separate. We label them as separate, we see them as separate, and really, when you peel apart the details and kind of get to look at the root, it's not separate. It's the human experience, isn't it?
That's right. That's right.
So, well, maybe we start by talking about what performance is, because I'd hate people to listen to the beginning of this podcast and think, well, I'm not a professional athlete and I'm not, CEO of a Fortune 500 company. So I'm not worried about performance. But we're all trying to get a little bit more out of how we invest our time and energy, aren't we? So, what kind of performance are you thinking about in terms of this conversation?
Yeah, I guess I think of like our body that, that we live in, these body clothes that we get to
Mm.
have as our tool in how we engage into the environment around us, right? And so that is physical performance to me, right?
Mm.
And we often think of things in like a measuring side of deep, like we set goals for ourselves that we want to measure our performance. Um, but like again, it's unique to where you are and each individual at a time. So some of us might be measuring our performance on a sport itself. How fast can I run the mile this season? And how do I train to make that, as um, as capable as possible, right? As much as I possibly can. How can I achieve that goal? That's the word I'm looking for. um, or like in a weight training setting, like I really want to, what's my PR in bench press?
Mhm,
So those are easy ways to kind of identify physical performance. It's sort of in that athletic side, but we're not all elite athletes,
mhm,
but I really do think we're all athletes, right?
mhm,
So my athletic endeavor might be running, swimming, biking, weight training, yoga, right? If that's what I think of. And it
mhm,
can be that my athletic endeavor is that, I make my living by hammering nails because I'm a construction worker. So,
mhm,
how many nails can I hammer efficiently, right? While protecting my joints and making sure that my headspace is in the right place to continue to my focus.
mhm.
So like I really think of our life's vocation, how we spend our physical time in life as part of our performance. It might be that, you want to be able to be strong enough to continue to pick up your child as they're growing through life or carry
Mhm.
them on your back to go on that hike that you like so much. All of that to me sits into the physical performance side of things. So
I
I
love
mean,
that.
yes, it's easy to get into that. Like, I want to measure it and, athletic performance versus life performance. But it's all about taking this physical tool that we have and,
Mhm.
making it as um, optimum as possible to interact into the world around us.
Yeah, I love that. And I've spent a bit of time with people who do define themselves as athletes, triathletes and multi-sport athletes, and even people at the gym, and they seem to have quite a different relationship to pain than the one that I have to pain, which is usually, pain go away. Pain is a pretty strong signal from my body. I'm going to listen. I'm going to stop. I'm going to try to make that pain go away. But often I hear in people who are really challenging their physical performance things like no pain, no gain, or pain is weakness leaving the body. They seem to see it as something of a sort of a challenge to be engaged with, as opposed to got to make that thing disappear. Is that something that you come across as well with people who really challenge their physical performance?
Absolutely. And,
Mm.
I think it also goes in this whole messy cycle of
Back to the
things.
circle.
Right. And so oftentimes a question that I get, whether I'm working with somebody who's coming to me because they want to perform better, they want to use their body better in life, whether that's an athlete or just someone who, wants to be able to hike. Or on the other side, a client that comes in who's been dealing with an injury. And the question I get so often is, how do I know? Right?
Hmm.
How do I know if I should push? No pain, no gain idea,
Yes.
or how should I know, when to pull back of like listen to my body?
Hmm.
And I think I get frustrated with myself, and I know a lot of people like feel that like it depends,
Yeah.
right? That's really the answer is it depends. But
Yeah.
I think in the end, if I was to give one blanket answer, it's always that you always listen to your
Hmm.
body and you use your own internal discernment to take action based on what you're hearing as it comes
Hmm.
in. Does that make sense?
Oh,
So if we back up a
100%.
little, yeah, if we
Yeah.
back up a little bit and think about a few like terms.
Yeah. Maybe we
So
do a little pain science 101. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, or even just like sensory science, right? Um, so if we think about like the idea of perception, right? If I perceive the world, that's to become aware of the world through our senses,
Mhm.
right? So if I perceive, if I perceive these trees behind me as being alders and they're green, that's because I have had something that's told me that in the
Mm.
past, but my eyes are
Context,
taking in that, right?
experience.
So
Mhm,
exactly. So I'm becoming aware of my environment through my senses. So that's perception, right?
mhm.
Interoception, which I know has been talked about a fair bit on yoga medicine recently, which makes me so excited. Um, but interoception is to become aware of our senses,
Mhm.
right? So it's not that I know that that's a tree out there. I'm perceiving that. But, like, somewhere in there, my eyes took in that awareness,
Mm,
right? So it's becoming aware that I have these internal senses.
mhm,
So, like, I can, without actually touching myself, I can feel that my heart is beating inside,
mhm.
right? If I really get in there, I can feel that my stomach is present and digesting. Does that make sense? So I think there's
Yes.
like it's really good to separate that it's like
Mm,
it's the becoming aware part,
mhm,
and before that is a signal that comes in. So interoception is the signal from the inside, right?
mhm,
Coming up and in to say, hey, there's like activity down here in my physiology that's happening. And it comes up and, bounces around the brain from all our different cortexes. And then our job is to make meaning out of that,
mhm. And that's a
right?
really similar process, at least I think it is, for interoceptive senses as it is how we perceive the outside world. Because when we're babies, we're just looking around and everything is amazing and it doesn't have a label. And, we don't know that fire is dangerous or that the stove is hot or it's just all amazing. And it's the same thing with perceiving our internal sensations. It takes practice and experience and context to go, oh, that's this. Oh, that's my tummy rumbling because I'm hungry. Or that's my stomach rumbling because something is not sitting well down there. That all of that context and experience comes from having experiences and then, perceiving whether they went well or went poorly. And then, oh, that's like that last time that yada, yada, yada. So again, we're kind of layering on our own interpretations, even of the simplest signals from inside the body.
Exactly,
Mm,
right? Exactly. It's all, like you said, it's all about context and
hmm
experience. And that part happens, after the message comes in,
hmm
right? And
And they're
so if we
different.
add
They're
the
different things. There's
they're
message and then
very
there's
different.
interpretation of message. Yes, I get that.
E exactly. And so if we think about that and we throw on that definition of nociception, right? So
Hmm
that's tends to be what people like to use really synonymously with pain, right? So oftentimes we hear that we get a pain signal, and the truth is pain is that interpretation of nociception, right? So
hmm
nociception is literally means threat or danger, and it's part of that, like it's the message coming up and in, it bounces around our brain, and then output of that experience or
hmm
output of that sensation is oftentimes that we have a painful experience.
hmm
But again, it's based on context.
Right. So really, it's
And
just
so
like a light on your dashboard is flashing, going, check the oil, check the oil. And because of experience, we're interpreting that as painful, whereas it's a warning. We're heading from the orange line toward the red line. You might want to do something about this.
that's absolutely right. Yep.
Hmm
And so I think if we pull this back into like the idea of physical performance and we
mm
understand that, I think just for a really simple example, if we're weight training because it's a really controlled environment, right?
hmm
Like let's say I'm lifting, 20-pound dumbbells and I'm curling them up and I start to get a signal from my bicep, right? And there's a lot of like different sensations of words that I could put to that signal, right? But at some point in time, the signal is going to go into a nociception, a threat signal that says,
hmm
ooh, if you keep doing this, I'm not going to be able to continue to perform. And then, I might tear a little bit. And
hmm
that's could be problematic, right? But that message usually comes up with our signals of other things, right? Of stretch reception and muscle activation,
hmm
and and even just the basic interoception awareness of
hmm
like blood flow to there. And so we have that choice to be like, okay, I'm working this. Yes, it's starting to feel warm. Now it's starting to burn a little
hmm
bit. And at what point is it that it's like, ooh, I actually have to stop? Right? And it's that sensitivity to those messages coming
hmm
in that we get to choose how sensitive do we want to be. This is
Oh,
when I think of
yes.
it's like, right? How sensitive do I want to be versus how much do I want to say, like, oh, yeah, I feel you. this is
Yes.
good. My muscles are working hard. We're going to
Yeah.
recruit some more motor units here. We're going to
Yeah.
send a little bit more blood flow down, and I'm going to keep going.
Mhm.
And then pretty soon I can be like, oh, right now I'm not just feeling that, like awareness that I'm working, but like, oh, this is getting to like, I just can't do
Yeah.
anymore.
The
And then,
clock is ticking
then I'm going
down.
to stop.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that definitely tallies with my brief experience of athletic performance. When I had a brief phase of trail running, I would do intervals. Shout out to wonderful local running coach Adrian Bailey, who would torture us to do 200-meter intervals and 400 and 800-meter intervals. And I got used to the feeling of maybe I'll throw up, maybe I'll pass out. But I never quite did throw up or pass out. So when I got to training for marathons, that experience of my muscles are burning, my lungs are burning, I might feel a little bit lightheaded, maybe I feel sick in my stomach, but I got to experience that I can actually do that for a really long time. I don't look pretty when I run, but I can keep going for a really long time, and I'm not sick, and I don't pass out, and I stop, and it goes away, and there's no lasting trauma to my body. Maybe my calves are a bit sore the next day, but I could go for another run. So I started to listen to those signals in quite a different way. Like, okay, this is a sign that I can't do this forever, but I can do it for a pretty long time, and there won't be any negative consequences afterwards. And so the signals got interpreted quite differently from how they did the first time. It was like, oh my God, what's happening? Am I going to be sick? Am I going to pass out? I got to sit down. Yeah.
Right.
Not
And so
selling
that, I
running to
mean, that,
people who don't like running, but not everyone feels like that when they run.
right. But I mean, it's a great example. And I think most of us can relate no matter what physical performance we've done. It
Mm,
can be like, wow, I can't push this vacuum any longer, or I can't hold this warrior two any longer. All
yeah.
right, come on, yoga
Yeah.
teacher, 10 breaths or don't take this long.
Exactly. But often you
Right?
can. You can probably hold for one more breath or maybe two more breaths. And, you can stop if you want to. You can come out if you want to. But often you can stay a bit longer and nothing terrible happens.
Exactly. And so
Mm,
that, if we come back to the like, when do I push and when do I pull back?
yeah.
It's I think first there's understanding that we don't have a lot of control over the messages that come up, right? They're going to come up. What we do have control over is how we start to become aware of them
Mm,
and all of the other little layers that we add to it, right? So if my first thought is when I feel that sensation of awareness that my body's working harder than it is right now, if
mm,
my first thought is I can't,
yeah.
what do you think is going to happen?
Yeah. All of those
Like I
signals are going to
really
be intensified with, well, this is dangerous. This is not natural. This is not harm. What if this hurts me? What if this, all of that sort of catastrophizing cascade?
right. And so that's one of the first things that I tend to ask people is like
Mm,
what can you identify as the thoughts? Right? Like if I can't is one of the first things, or like this
mm,
hurts, or this is hard and I'm gonna fail. That's like, okay, so what happens if all you do is change that question,
mm.
right? Or change that thought into a question,
Like,
right? So
can
it's
I?
not, can I?
Yeah.
What if I can?
Mm,
This is hard, but maybe I can keep going.
mm,
What's going to happen if I keep going?
mhm.
And even just taking that moment to take the pause to ask the question, you're
Mm.
already continuing longer than you would if you stopped the minute you said, I can't,
Because all of a sudden
right?
there's this spaciousness. It's not signal, outcome. It's signal,
Right.
questioning, investigation, interpretation, maybe outcome, maybe, you continue. Maybe that's your outcome as you continue and see, well, I'll pay attention to that. I'll keep an eye on that and see whether it changes as I carry on. And already you're describing quite a different experience, a much more spacious experience between my bicep hurts, I'm putting the weight down, to
That's
I'm,
right.
I'm feeling workload in my bicep, but I've felt that before and nothing bad happened. Maybe I can't do 100 more, but let's see if I can do 3 more. Let's see how I feel if I already there's that spaciousness around the sensation.
That's right. And I feel like
Mm.
that's the magic of training, right?
Mhm.
I mean, that's where we really get to, and whether we're training on our yoga mat,
Mhm.
right? Or whether we're training in the woods to go trail running, or,
Mhm.
we're training hanging from a bar because we want to get better at rock climbing. But it's that, like, that moment of taking away an expectation of performance and putting
Mhm.
yourself in a scenario of, I'm training to improve my ability to perform better in this body,
Mhm.
right? And so we pull that and create more spaciousness,
I love that.
which is beautiful, right? It's a
Yeah.
beautiful thing to do in life.
Mm. And I mean, it
um,
it it shows that when you're training, even if you're training for physical performance, yes, you're training your muscles. Yes, you're training your fascia and your tendons and your ligaments. You might be training your cardiovascular system, but you're also really clearly training your brain and your nervous system to
that's right.
get much more accurate in terms of how it perceives the signals and how close that sort of flashing light on the dashboard is to now I've got to pull over and check the oil because you've
That's right.
listened to these signals so many times month after month, year after year, and you understand a lot more, you appreciate a lot more detail about them.
That's Yeah, and so it's about changing our patterns, right?
Mm,
And to change our patterns, we have to identify what they are, right? So
yes.
if your pattern tends to be immediately into a belief system of "I can't,"
Mhm.
then recognizing, opening the space around it and saying, "Well, what if I can?"
Mhm.
And then I think even taking it one step further of, what creates this sense of "I can't?"
Mhm.
Was I raised in an environment where, you know, my mom told me, "Ugh, if you lift that one more time, you're gonna break your back." Even if I didn't
Yeah.
really listen or I laughed at it, like, it gets in there.
Mhm.
Or did I watch a family member struggle with physical performance because of
Mhm.
some sort of a pain scenario?
Mm.
That gets in there.
Mhm.
And even on the other side, what if I come from a family of long standing elite athletes? Like, that's part of my being. So I might
Mhm.
go both ways with that. I might have huge expectations for
100%.
myself, right?
Yeah.
And I might also have, like, this ease of just like, this just comes naturally to me, right? But one thing I do want to, and I don't want to lose in my head, is you made the comment of, like, I'm doing the bicep curl, and last time maybe I tore my bicep,
Mm.
right? But this time I can keep going.
Mhm.
So I think that's a huge thing, is remembering what your experiences have been in the past, both,
Mhm.
positive and less desirable experiences,
Mhm.
and how they play a role in where we are right now. And
Yes.
remembering that we can kind of remind ourselves, oh, but I'm not there now,
Mhm. Yeah,
like,
I'm really glad you drew that out because you're right. There's the first time, there's the initial experience. But even if you were somebody who did always have this really easy relationship to pain and you get injured, then making the space to go, "Oh, I'm in a scenario that feels similar to when I hurt myself," and I'm recognizing that. I'm recognizing that there's a level of anxiety in me that wasn't present when I did this last time because now I've got the experience of getting hurt. Now, this experience could be the same, but this experience could be different because XYZ, I've done my rehabilitation, or I'm paying a lot more mindful attention this time, or this time I'm really tuning into my breathing, or this time I'm using better form and technique, or whatever. But naming the thing rather than just
right,
pretending that the anxiety isn't in there, giving it a name, giving it a voice, bringing it out into the light and saying, I see you. I see that there's anxiety there. That's fair enough, but this time is different because. Yeah. And
right,
again, that requires that real spaciousness, doesn't it? Not just
right,
signal output, but signal, space, questioning, investigation, interpretation, and then response.
yeah. And what's really fun, I think, Rachel, is that, um, as we're talking about it, it sounds like now, like, we've drawn out these bicep curls or this run into, like, a 5-10 minute experience from, the stimulus into the
Yeah.
actual choice afterward. But, but,
It's
this
pretty quick.
spacious, actually, it's quite quick. It's
Yeah.
really quite quick to be like, oh, what if I can? Or I'm not in that environment anymore.
Yeah.
And even like I think a lot I work a lot with athletes and saying like, okay, so you do need to rest. Your body's telling you like, I can't hold this plank any longer.
Mhm.
Okay, set your knees down. But set your knees down for one breath and then ask
Mhm.
yourself that question of like, am I
Can I go
really
back
done?
in? Yeah.
Or can I go back in? Right.
Yeah.
And then the next time you just go like, oh, well, I set my knees down at 32 seconds and tomorrow I'm going to set my knees down at 34 seconds, but definitely not 32. And, if you just do these tiny, tiny little incremental increases and
Yeah.
create that ability to retrain those little patterns that come into play,
Mm.
it's amazing how quickly that space opens up and how quickly you can go through those little conversations in your head.
Yeah. Oh, you're so right, because talking is slow. Thinking is instantaneous, but putting
Yeah,
those concepts into words takes time. And maybe that's really important to do in conversation with your physical therapist or, your regular therapist to tease those thoughts out and to turn them into words and to examine them fully. But you're right, in the moment, once you've challenged your patterns, it can be instantaneous, can't it? You think the thought,
that's
you
right.
go, that doesn't have to happen today, or maybe today I can stay another breath and done. Split second.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is to really make sure that there's a lot of space around the self-forgiveness side,
Mm,
right? So you set the intention when you come into your training area that, I'm going to ask for a little bit more today in my physical performance. I'm going to, in the words I used earlier, I'm going to try to be a little less sensitive,
mhm.
right, to the senses coming in. And then, you start running and all of a sudden, like you're starting to feel uncomfortable and pretty quickly you let that uncomfortable sensation turn into, a perception of pain and you want to stop.
Mm,
Just setting the intention that you're going to be a little bit more aware is a huge gain, one.
mm.
And then the next thing is like, okay, you set the intention, you realize that like you hit your, we could call it a wall or your ceiling sooner than what you really feel like you need to.
Mhm.
Then later, if you want to, you can start to tease that out a little bit, right? Like I in my little discussion on the monthly dose for this topic, I told a quick story about a friend that I um I did a 30-day Grand Canyon rowing trip with,
Oh,
right?
wow.
And he was one of our lead rowers. And I mean, he was just amazing out there, just pulling super hard. And like when we'd go off on hikes, he would be like scaling the rock faces, like this mountain goat. And I was just like, wow, Tyler, this is amazing. And then, fast forward 3 months, we're back home and he decides he wants to join the strength training class that I teach. And he was the first one to quickly like hit his red line and feel like he had to step outside for fresh air because he thought he was going
Yeah.
to throw up. And like, I'm
Yeah.
watching him push like weight around that's so much lighter. And all I just said was like, just for today, when you feel like you have to step outside, take a breath.
Mhm.
And then if you still need to step outside, great. But at least create that place for a breath.
Mm.
And then, when you're doing this box jump, don't think of a wooden box in front of you. Think of that Grand
You're
Canyon rock.
clambering up
Think
the
of
riverbank.
exactly.
Yeah.
Take this
Context.
pressure off of like the environment that you're in and put yourself in the environment that you feel the most joyful in. And then
Mhm.
slowly start to bring it in. And then what was really fun is like he like came around with it pretty quick. But checked in with him later and and he was really honest that he said like, as a young child, I did do a fair amount of athletic training or performance and my coaches were mean.
Mm.
They were really they had that very strong, like, you have to, you have to, you have to, definitely more into that no pain, no gain side.
Yeah.
And, I think it was a lot of that his stress responses just coming into a more gym type space were
Mhm.
already elevated. So then when we ask for physical performance, he is tipping over,
Yeah.
right? And so I think that's another thing that we have to really start to bring into the side of discernment is
Yeah.
what else is happening in my life? right?
Yeah.
If my stress cup is already really full,
Mhm.
the physical performance can help to kind of work some of that energy out. But if you're in that space of continuing to kind of be your own cheerleader, as I often say, when your head's saying, I can't, and you're like, no, you can, I believe in
Mm.
you can. But there's that element of, I just can't.
Yeah.
That might be because your body really just can't take any more of this stress load, whether
Yeah.
it's really good stress load, like in that physical training side, or it's just like situational stress. It's still stress, it's still chemicals
Yeah.
running around in our system.
Yeah, and
So
I
I
know
kind of
I
blurred into a
committed
lot of
the
things there, but
no, no, I love that, and I committed the cardinal sin when talking about humans before of using a dashboard because we aren't machines, we're more like, ecosystems, aren't we? And so in this complicated ecosystem, every day is different, isn't it? Your sleep,
Mhm.
your nutrition, your stress, your relationships, your worries, your mental state, your energetic state, all of these things go into this really complicated stew so that even if the physical challenge is identical, and often it isn't, weather and terrain and whatever, even if the physical challenge is identical, you're a different person to the person you were yesterday and the day before and last week. And so there has to be that space for there are some things I can control and there are some things I have agency over, but also just some days are good days and some days are not good days. And
That's right.
I have to create space for that and trust that if I am training for something, whether it is a goal or an outcome, I just have to trust that I'm doing the best I can most of the time. And the bad days are sprinkled in there. Some days I don't have my PR. Some days I don't have my fastest time. And that's just how it is. That's just how it is.
That's right. And
Mm,
so, if we circle back to the question of when do I push and when do I pull back?
mm,
And when do I listen to my body and when do I not listen to my body? It's
yeah.
like all is true all the time,
Yeah.
right? I always listen to my body.
Yes.
And I try to create space to understand what it is that it's actually trying to tell me
Mm,
and what I'm aware of from my senses internally, what I'm
mm,
aware of from my environment, what I'm aware of from my emotional state and my psychological state.
mm,
And then, what am I forgetting to be aware of, right? Maybe my body's really asking for rest because I
mhm.
haven't been sleeping well. So, like, instead of training today, potentially I need to set my alarm for an hour later instead and just let myself sleep, right?
Mm,
And and do we know what the exact right answer or wrong answer is to that?
yeah.
Not really.
No.
But I do think that sometimes if we're a little more quiet during that discernment side,
Mm,
shutting down the expectations, shutting down the messages that we've been told, and really starting to learn to listen to those internal, signals, we do know. We do know, how often is it that you're like, "Oh, I just wanna sleep." And there's
mm,
that little voice that's like, "No, you need to get up and move,"
mhm. You'll
but the
feel
bigger
better if
voice is
you
like, "Exactly."
yeah.
Yeah, the bigger voice is like, "No, just sleep, hit the snooze button."
Yeah.
So I love the thought of, like, the wisdom is that quiet voice.
Mhm,
And I really believe that's true when it comes to our physical body. And I believe that's true in our emotional state and our psychological state too, that it's the quieter voice. And if we can learn to, shut down the larger screaming thing,
mhm.
whether that's our quads because we're running, our heart rate because, yeah, right? Like if we can quiet that down,
Mm,
that more like wisdom, true deep voice that knows what we need will
yes.
come out. And then it'll go,
Yes.
nah, I could keep going. I need to slow my breath. But I have the
Yes.
ability to do that without stopping my performance right now.
Yeah. I love that because I think we can internalize a lot of the voices that we hear from the outside, whether it's the abusive coaches that your friend was still hearing in his head from when he was younger, or whether it's the social media post that you've just read that said, only weak people hit the snooze button in the morning, or whatever that outside voice
Yeah.
is. kind of set that to one side and go, but what am I really feeling? What am I actually feeling? I think you're right. I think there usually is a quieter voice that tells us what's really going on. And if I'm
Yeah,
honestly not sure, I'll often start something and see how I respond. And if the signals I'm getting
exactly.
are, yeah, no, not today, fair enough, I listen. But
Right.
usually I am sure. Usually I really do know. Do I need to hike today? Is it going to be a really slow hike today? Am I going to push it today? Yeah, usually I do really know what I need.
Yeah. 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 And I think that's, part of the beauty that we get from a yoga practice, right?
Yeah.
Is learning to have the ability to tune in and recall that self-study. And so whether your yoga practice is actually, on a mat, or whether it's out on a trail,
Mm.
or in a gym or on a bike, but just remembering that that's what it is about coming back in there. And likely if you just try one way or the other, it's not going to harm you,
Yeah, you'll
you
start to
know.
gather some data either way. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, I love that you said that because we've been talking about introception as if it's just kind of something that we all have, but it is something that we need to learn because, when we're babies, we have all of these inputs and it's like, oh, wow, input. It's the context and the experience. It's what happens to us and what we hear and see around us that starts to give those experiences meanings. And some of us have spent years practicing yoga and really teasing out those experiences and looking at them in a lot more detail. And plenty of people haven't. My partner, I'm regularly stunned that he'll say his stomach is sore. And I will say, do you mean the muscles or do you mean your stomach inside? He's like, I don't know. And to me, those things are completely different experiences. But to him, it's just his
Absolutely.
stomach is sore. He doesn't know whether it's inside or the muscles on the outside. Who knows? It's sore. That stuff takes learning. It takes practice, doesn't it? So how
It
can
does.
we better train that quality of discernment so that we can hear that really quiet voice?
I think we've been, like, alluding to it the whole time, right? Which is creating the space for it.
Oh, no. So it's not just some quick thing we can do every morning for 5 minutes. It's a practice. Damn it. This keeps coming up in this podcast over and over again. It's not a simple thing, it's the ongoing practice.
And guess what? That's simple.
It is. It is, but it's not a simple one off. It's a simple
No.
process that you can be involved and engaged in until the end of your days.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that as a little bit of a, a sassy remark, but, um, I do think if we look at it that way, that
Mhm,
it is simply about choosing to start to become aware,
mhm,
choosing to start to practice, choosing to change one thing each time we come to our yoga mat or we come to the gym, whatever that physical performance is that you want to do. It might even be, again, like getting down to the floor to play with your child or your grandchild or your niece, right?
mhm,
Like choosing to say, "Do I have to hold on to something as I move down to the floor? Or
mhm,
could I start to go as low as possible before I grab onto something?" Or
mhm,
vice versa, standing up, right? So it's that choosing to become aware that this is a patterned response that I do every time, right?
mhm.
I set myself a timer to hold a 1 minute plank, and at 58 seconds, I don't think I can keep going, right? What
Plank is
if
such a
we
great
like
example because usually 3 seconds in, I'm like, "I'm never gonna make it because it feels terrible, but it doesn't feel any more terrible at 58 seconds than it does at 3.
No, that's right. And it feels a lot less terrible if you tell a story or start laughing or,
Yeah.
you know, concentrate on your breath instead of, oh yeah, my shoulders, my arms, my core, maybe even my quads are all saying they don't want to be in this position any longer.
Mhm,
But if
mhm,
I take that awareness away to something else, then they quiet down, right?
mhm.
And then we can stay. So I'll just say that, I think the choice to practice is simple. Following through with it, of course, that's being human. We
Yeah.
we often need to be reminded to do the things that are best for us over and
Mm,
over and over again. But just, if every day it's like, okay, today I'm just going to notice this one little pattern and see if I can change one tiny thing about it. And it might be
Mhm.
the monologue in my head. It might be the environment that I'm in when I do the pattern. It might be, you know, the temperature of my body, right?
Yeah.
It might be how much fluid I have been putting into my system or what my nutrition has been. Like you said
Mm.
before, there's so many little aspects that we do actually have the ability to control,
Mhm.
and yet we like to focus on the things that we can't control,
Yeah.
right? Like, I want this discomfort to go away. Well, the more you try to push it away, the louder it's going to get,
Yeah.
right? So I think, like, just remembering to like acknowledge that, yes, I hear you. I'm going
Mm.
to include you, but I'm going to put my attention into all of these other things that I can, put more control into.
I love that, and I feel like you've given a bunch of really simple and approachable ways for people to bring just that little bit of curiosity into their physical practice, whatever it is, whether it's yoga or running or weightlifting, just to be asking questions about their assumptions. The other thing that came up for me as I was listening to you is sometimes we don't see our own assumptions until we have them reflected back to us from somebody else. So,
Mm.
like you with your friend saying, just imagine that you're back in the environment where you are, king of the universe and you're charging up the riverbanks and pulling a whole raft full of people. And it was that sort of line of questioning that kind of prompted the reflection in him of, oh, this is bringing back memories of.
Yeah.
And sometimes you do need to have that reflected from the outside for you to realize, oh, not everybody has that experience. Not everybody has that attachment or that association with this environment. Maybe that means that association is optional. And I don't
Right.
have to be swayed by it. And sometimes that requires you just to kind of be looking around you and talking to people. Somebody else is looking quite cheerful in plank. Is it because they're 25 times stronger than me, or are they just choosing to smile and laugh instead of, frowning and letting their head hang? Maybe you ask them
Yeah.
afterwards.
Right. I mean, isn't that beautiful as a student and or a teacher in
Mm,
any environment, right? Is asking the question, you know, if I'm the student, what to my teacher, what do you see when I'm in plank? You know, do you see that I'm shaking and can't hold it anymore? Because if my muscles are actually at that point of failure, that's
yeah.
what you will see.
Yeah.
Right? You will see somebody who like literally is shaking themselves until they collapse to the ground. And
Yeah.
if the teacher sees, well, you look totally strong
Mhm.
the whole time you're there. What if I could see myself that way? Right?
Mm.
So asking that question, like, wow, this feels really uncomfortable to me. How does it look on the outside? And just
Yeah.
keeping it really curious, which can be hard, right? It can
Yeah.
be hard for us to open that place of vulnerability to really say like, well, what is it that you see when you look at me running or,
Mm.
in warrior 2? I feel like I'm super low to the ground, but maybe I'm like barely have a knee bend at all. and as if
You're describing my
and
experience of editing my filmed classes like, "Man, I thought I was working so hard, and I look like I'm having a picnic." Or vice versa. I thought I had my stuff together, but there was sweat dripping off both nose and chin at the end of that class.
yeah. Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
even you talked about shaking muscles. I know that that's something that has really changed since I've been practicing with Tiffany. That sometimes when she's teaching something, she'll say, you might even push to the point where the muscles are shaking and quivering a little bit. Like, let that be okay. Let that be new information coming into the neuromuscular system and not something that freaks you out like, oh, I've got to stop because I'm shaking. But, oh, I'm right on the edge now of learning something new or building some new capacity. That context shift was a real game changer for me.
Yeah, when it comes to like a position where you're holding something for strength and
Mm,
your muscles start shaking like that, that is actually in your physiology, your muscles just trying to recruit more motor units.
mhm,
And that's how we gain strength is by building and recruiting more motor units, right? So getting into that zone and being comfortable in there, I mean, I often think like, "You're getting stronger right at this
Yes,
very
exactly.
moment."
I know I can't be here forever, but I can be here for a little while, and this is really where that novelty is kicking in. This is the
That's
new
right.
experience that my body so craves, have some new
That's right.
interaction with itself. Mm,
And that's a great moment right there if we break this down, like, as what we were talking about before of, like, what tends to go through our head when we feel that shaking, right? Like, "I'm gonna fall. I can't hold this anymore."
mm.
Depending on what kind of position you're in. So what if you do,
Yes.
right?
Oh,
So what
yes.
if you do fall?
Yeah.
The world's not gonna
Chances are
end.
you're
You're
not
likely
hanging onto
not
the edge
gonna
of a
break.
cliff. Yeah. I
Right,
just had this
exactly.
conversation a couple of weeks ago with a client who was holding a dumbbell, and she was like, "I can't hold it. I can't hold it." And I was like, "Okay, I'll take it from you, but let's talk about that. What happens if you drop it?" And she's like, "Oh, well, what if my foot's in the way?" And I was like, "Well, what if your foot's not in the way? Like, what if we set you up so that your foot isn't directly under the weight? Now, what happens if you drop it? Well, what if it dents the floor?" I'm like, "Yeah, we're on pretty thick floor here. And, worst case scenario, you dent the floor. That's not catastrophe. Maybe it's worth challenging that question a little bit. And maybe you don't drop it
Yeah,
at all."
right. And see, isn't that a beautiful demonstration of how, like, we don't know what all has been put into that
Yeah.
person's being
Yeah.
to create an environment where everything feels like it's something she can't do, right?
Hmm.
Like, I might make a noise. She
Yeah.
doesn't really think about it in her head that way, but potentially she grew up in an environment or
Yeah.
has spent a lot of time in an environment where it's like, you can't make a noise, you can't dent the floor.
Yeah.
If you don't put on socks, then you're gonna hurt your foot outside and then we're gonna amputate your foot, right? Like
Yeah.
these
All
things,
of these
like
weird things that
catastrophic
find their
messages,
way in there.
right?
Yes, for sure.
Exactly. So I think that's really beautiful. And can we do that for ourselves? And
Hmm.
like if I just step back a moment and finish the thought of like, as a student, I can ask those questions of what do you see? But as a teacher, I can also ask those questions, right? Like to my student, do you want to know what I see? Do you want to hear what my perception is of how you're presenting yourself working, right? I mean, that's basically what I did with my friend Tyler and the gym versus Grand Canyon environment, right? Is like, do you want to hear how I see you?
Hmm.
And I think if we ask it that way, then again, we just created a little bit of a space for them to go, do I? Do I want to know that this could be different? You saying, I'll take the weight from you, but do you want to break this down a little more and
Yeah.
talk it through? Like, do you want to just drop the weight a few times and know that the
See
world
what
isn't going to
happens.
end?
Yeah.
And then see how long you can hold on to it, knowing that
Yeah.
if you drop
Or
it, that's
I
going to
can
be
drop it.
okay.
I can be the one to break that glass ceiling. I can drop the weight. We can see what happens. If I'm in trouble, I'm in trouble, but maybe I won't get in trouble.
Yeah,
And then you can have a go dropping the weight.
exactly.
Make it fun. Maybe we are naughty kids. There's some fun being a naughty
Oh,
kid as an adult where you're in charge of the consequences.
yes, yes. I think having that childlike wonder inside of us, especially when we're performing in our physical body, is such a
Hmm.
great thing to do.
Yeah.
And, a lot of us at some point in time have been told no, and sometimes in helpful ways, and a lot of times in things that turn quite unhelpful.
Mm.
But that gets to be the beauty of an adult too, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that we get to go like, "Oh, yeah, I was told that, but I get to choose now,
Yeah.
and
I'm
I'm
still gonna
I'm gonna
brush my
choose this way
teeth.
for a
That was a
while."
good one.
Yeah,
But you know what? Maybe I am gonna make a noise. Maybe I am
yeah,
gonna
mhm,
dent the floor. What are you gonna do about it? It's my
that's
house. It's
right.
my floor.
Maybe I'm gonna run and look clumsy and I don't care. Yes, maybe I'm gonna hold this position until I actually fall.
Actually fall. Yeah.
Actually fall.
And
Yeah,
amazingly, I won't shatter into a million pieces. Yeah, I
no.
love that. And again, this is a different kind of space, isn't it? You have the kind of thoughtful, introspective space that you can create in an instant. But you've also got the space of maybe I don't have to take it all so seriously. Like where we started off, I'm not competing in the Olympics. I'm not CEO of a Fortune 500 company, the consequences of my performance aren't earth shattering. Can I just have fun with it? Can I be willing to play a little bit? And maybe I look stupid. Maybe I look uncoordinated. Maybe I fail and I fall over. But really, who cares?
And isn't that a great way to even just unload that stress cup a little bit?
Yeah.
Right? Like if we know our physical performance partially has to do with how well our body can, process through the stress chemicals that come out. And if we already
Mm,
have a lot in there, just because we're throwing all these expectations at ourselves, in a lot of ways, we're setting ourselves up to perform less efficiently because we've
mm,
already said like you have to, you have to, you have to, and we've created this environment of a stress load. Yeah, if we take it to joyful and play, like, great.
Yeah,
Great.
automatically
Watch
create
your
some space.
performance soar.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so
And then
true. And even
also
with,
realize that who cares, right? If your performance doesn't soar and you had fun, what's
you still
better
had fun.
end? We still had fun. We still got
You
some
win either
positive
way.
ignition nodes sent off.
I love that. So bringing it back to yoga practice, you've already talked about a lot of ways that we can start to train those skills in our yoga practice, imagining it's within the four corners of a mat. So it could be as simple as I'm in plank and I don't want to be here anymore because I'm getting signals from the front of my body, my chest, my quads, they're quivering a little bit and I'd like to come out because I'm perceiving that as uncomfortable. I can come out if I want to. Of course I can. I'm in charge. But maybe I stay for another breath and see, do I actually fall out? Do my arms give way? Does my core give way? Maybe it does and nothing catastrophic happens, or maybe I am able to stay for another breath or two or three. So you've talked about kind of inviting that kind of exploration into how we use our bodies in yoga practice where really the consequences are low because we're not competing with anyone else. There's no PR that we're trying to generate on the yoga mat. So it's a pretty safe space for exploration. Any other ways that you would suggest we can start to build that skill set in yoga practice?
Yeah, I mean, I think, really asking the big open-ended question.
Mm,
So, I mean, I feel like you did a great job of demonstrating, like, changing the narrative.
hmm
But I feel like on a yoga mat, one of the things that that space allows us is the ability to say, to understand, why is my first thought I can't?
mm,
What is it that I actually feel in my body, and where is this coming from?
hmm
So that you can starting to bring together that whole universal picture within yourself, right? So maybe, at one time coming in and telling yourself, I can, and, you know, having a story or playing music or changing the environment. I mean, this sounds silly, but even putting your yoga mat in a different location so that your
hmm
view is different.
hmm
Go to the back of your mat instead of the front of the mat. Put 3 mats down and take up the whole space, right?
We're allowed to do that.
Oh my god. Exactly. Make a game out of it, all of those things. But I think,
Mm.
that's about taking it to really change the performance itself, which there's beauty in that,
Mm,
right? There's beauty in that. But if we really want to think about it from the perspective that I hold of like, this is my yoga practice, it's not about the performance. It's about the learning that you get to take from your mat into other areas of performance, right?
mm,
So I would say use that time, whether it's plank or lunges or even transitions,
mm,
right? Why is it that every time I pull my knee to my chest, as I'm coming into a lunge, that it only makes it this far? Like, what is really stopping me? What do I feel in my body? Okay, I
mm,
feel some stretch sensation in the back of my hamstrings. Feel some closing down in the front of my hip. I feel my shoulders working hard. Oh gosh, my core isn't there at all.
mhm.
All right. So what if I said, "Hey core, you could be here right now." Oh,
Come to the
all of a
party.
sudden, right. All of a sudden I can pull that foot a little bit more. And if I
Mm,
go, "Oh, you know, all that I'm feeling in my hamstrings is stretch, which isn't about not having enough length, even though we like to believe that. There's
Mm,
a big element there. Again, this whole continuum of that first I receive a message of potential, right? So I've become very sensitive to the stretch message signal.
mhm,
But I can go, all right, so I'm almost to my end. But what if I, instead of trying to push harder into it, what if I just soften that like resistance that I'm now putting in place? If I
mm,
soften that, can I get my foot a little bit further?
mm,
You know, or is it that this is just where I go? So I look at that same spot every time. And instead of
mhm,
looking there, what if I look way out there and just see where the foot happens to land? Right.
mm,
So, I mean, I feel like what I would say is come to your mat with a very open sense of curiosity and
mm,
take that interoception even deeper, right?
mm,
So I'm becoming more and more aware of what my senses, what are the senses that are there?
mm,
And then what is it that they're telling me and how can I include them in a non-threatening way in a like, that's fascinating that this leg does this feeling and this leg does this feeling. Does that mean that this one's right and this one's wrong? No, maybe I just
yeah,
want to try to find the equal space between the two, right?
mm.
Does that make sense?
It does, and I'm kind of in my head remembering 2 separate experiences on the yoga mat. The one is the in the moment of what am I feeling, and what if I changed what I was feeling or brought something new in or softened something that's there, that sort of in the moment awareness. And then the other thing that for me is fairly unique to yoga that I don't do in more active physical pursuits is there's usually some slower, quieter, more reflective space toward the end. So I've done my standing flow, I've done my stepping forward to downward facing dog, and then usually there's some version of me coming down to the floor and being quiet and still. And at least for me, that's often when those deeper signals bubble up like, why do I always hear that message of can't? Or why do I always stop when for me, that reflection doesn't always come at the during. It sometimes comes in the quiet reflection afterwards as I'm heading towards Shavasana, or perhaps comes up in meditation, that I think is something that is fairly unique to yoga practice for me anyway. When I go for a hike, when the hike is finished, I get in my car and I drive home. I don't have that quiet moment of what just happened then and what came up for me. I'm just happily driving home listening to podcasts. So yeah,
Mhm.
I don't know whether that adds anything to the conversation, but that's certainly my experience is often those sort of deeper observations or realizations don't come up in the during. They don't come up until the after.
Right. And thank you for sharing that. It is, I think it does add. Um, and I feel like I want to say, wouldn't it be
Words.
beautiful? I know. Wouldn't it be beautiful to create a scenario where that quiet reflection can happen anytime you decide you want to bring it into your space,
Yeah, I
right?
mean, that's
So
the yoga practice for me anyway,
that's
is
the hope, right?
could I do that in the
So,
during? Wouldn't that be a
right,
nice
right,
aim to
right,
have? Yeah.
right. And so maybe we like flip our yoga practice upside down and start in Shavasana
Mhm,
and it just say, like, my intention right now is no matter how fast I move, no matter how hard my muscles are working, I'm going to keep my headspace as much as I can into this place of quiet, curious reflection.
mhm,
And, you know, just like any practice, right? You're going to pull away from it. But when you set the intention, as soon as you notice you've pulled away, you bring it back, right?
mhm,
And that's great. And on the other side, like you go for your hike. What if I make sure that on this hike, I'm going to allow 10 extra minutes at the end
mhm,
of the hike or toward the end of the hike to find a quiet spot
mhm,
and just sit in reflection. And I mean, when we think about whole, I'm going to take a big sidestep here, but when we think about whole body and being wellness and health, like taking those quiet reflection spots in nature is so good for us. And you're right.
Hmm.
So often we like hike, we get to the summit, maybe we have our summit beer or whatever
Yes.
joyful thing.
That's
And then
usually
we're
where
like,
I spend the time, straight back down.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. And then we come straight back down and we forget to like stop and be like, wow, did you know that there were like these tiny little toads the whole way this path we were following, and we never stopped down to look to see like, oh my gosh, there's
Mm.
that tiny little toad and look at how it moves. Look at how it hops. Wonder if I could hop like that. Right? But it's back to that playful curiosity, the childlike wonder.
Mm.
But also a lot of it comes back to this idea of patterning,
Mhm.
right? That's what you just described there is two very specific patterns. On
Mhm.
your yoga mat, you work hard and then you leave space because it's part of the patterned practice of yoga that you leave space in shavasana or a seated meditation to
Yeah.
let that practice wash over you and
Yeah.
come to full circle.
And
Why
the
can't we
interesting
take
thing
that
is
into anything?
I hear this from people all the time. In fact, Tiffany and I recently had a conversation along these lines about restorative yoga. Like, why does stillness and quiet and a bunch of props, why is that luxury? Why do so
Mm,
many of us have to do the work first before we earn the rest? It's exactly these patterns that our practice asks us to identify and examine and question. Maybe we choose to keep them. Maybe that's like my parents always said to brush my teeth. I'm going to keep on brushing my teeth. But maybe it's like the don't make noise in the house. And that's a rule that we choose to disregard. It's all about the examination and deciding, is this a pattern that I like and I want to keep? Or is this a pattern that's holding me back from performing more fully engaging with this amazing body in this incredible world?
right. And
Mm.
acknowledging that um, it's not about anybody else's expectations or desires, but it's about what in here is your body, your being, your inner self asking for, right?
Mm.
If you want to be able to move faster, then likely slowing down and having a bunch of props isn't going to get you there. But maybe slowing down and having a bunch of props is your pattern, right?
Mhm.
I mean, I only bring that out because I feel like um, I sit in that realm of exactly what you just described of like, ooh, did I earn these props? Like, is this okay? Have I done
Yeah.
enough today to say like I could slow down, right? But there are a lot of people who feel on the other side,
Mhm.
right? Like, oh yeah, give me the props. Like one of my friends used to call it the lion and the panda, right? Some people are just natural panda bears. Like they're gonna lay around with all the props.
Love that.
And that person might need to like get a push, and that push actually might be more restorative to them
Mhm.
because it's novel and our nervous
Yeah.
systems love novel things.
I love
Um,
that. I think that's a really powerful reminder is there aren't right ways and wrong ways. There aren't better ways and worse ways. It all comes down to that messy, complicated, unique experience, that circle that you described at the beginning. That's not a spectrum of pandas to lions. It's figuring out who we are in the moment and what we actually need. And that requires that space and discernment to really listen. And then from that listening, interpret and decide what action we want to take, if any.
yeah, exactly. And remembering that all of these messages that we get from our body, that's all they are is messages,
Yeah.
right? They don't contain any true meaning.
Well, we
you know,
talked about this in the first podcast, and we have accurate but not
yeah,
true. Like, yeah, you want to
yeah,
listen. They're sending you information. That information is accurate, but it's not necessarily the full picture because it is based on patterns that may or may not be applicable in this moment. And it's worth you kind of digging a little deeper and going, is
right,
that true now, today? Maybe it is,
right.
but maybe it isn't.
That's right. Yeah.
Any last sort of nuggets that you want to leave people with before we wrap up?
Oh, gosh, we covered so much. I think one of my favorite things is like when you listen to something like this, um, don't feel like you have to understand every bit of it,
Mm.
but take something that really resonates and take it forward. And then, when you feel like, okay, I've got that one, then maybe come back and listen again and take another
Mm.
little piece and let that, go into practice for a while and then come back again. I think sometimes, these longer discussions, we get so excited and then we either feel overwhelmed, we
Yes.
can't put it all out there.
Yeah, I'm really glad you
So
finished with that because you're right. If you're getting 38 different signals from your body, maybe today you're just exploring the one.
that's
Yeah, it sounds a lot more approachable.
that's right. That's right.
So, in
Yeah.
terms of resources that we can send people to, you have a great online course on yoga medicine, on pain science for yoga teachers that really gets into the nitty gritty of that whole concept that we started with about the difference between pain and nociception and the importance of interpretation and experience and inputs from our stress levels and our sleep levels and all of that sort of stuff. So people, if you haven't dived into that course already, I would highly recommend it. You also have a previous podcast on persistent pain, which, sometimes we can do something about and sometimes we can't. And we just have to create a peaceful place of coexistence with. And then you've done a monthly dose on yoga medicine online before, and you've just done another one that will be coming out in conjunction with this podcast. That is it diving into similar topics to what we're talking about today? Yeah. Pain science and
That's right.
performance.
Yeah, yeah, and I think of it really as it's neuroscience, right? So just understanding the communication from our insides and that space of awareness and how much we have control over that. And then there's some fun practices, associated with that to look at a lot of the ends of the perspective that we just talked about. So, how we can slow down and restore and
Mm,
maybe just create that open sense of awareness of grounding into our senses. And then, if flexibility is something we've really been seeking, how sometimes when we just push into stretches, we're actually creating more sensitivity around that stretch reception. And what
mm,
we need, or what we want to try to do potentially, is recognize, I'm just really sensitive to the signal. So what happens if I relax, or what happens if I contract for a moment? Then can I find a place of relaxation? So
mm.
there's a couple classes that play through that. um,
Fun.
and then and then the strength training side, there's a couple kind of like yoga conditioning things that I just give those little cues of, where is your headspace right now, and if the words I can't are coming in, what happens if you change that, or
Mm.
if we just slow down for one notch, can we keep going? We don't actually have to give up completely. So yeah, I'm really excited for people to join on those, and I love to hear feedback because yeah, I just, it's nice to know there's a community out there.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. We'll link to all of those and also to your website, which is where you tend to send people who
Oh,
are
thank you.
curious about you and what you do. Thank you so much for giving us all of this wealth of information. It kind of felt like a therapy session for me. There are lots of little nuggets to dig into, so I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks, Rachel. It's always a pleasure to be here and to talk with you.
Thanks for listening to Yoga Medicine. If you liked the show, be sure to subscribe and leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you got something out of this episode, please spread the word and share it with a friend. You can find more information, articles, trainings, and classes at yogamedicine.com. Check us out on social media as Yoga Medicine, or you can email us at info@yogamedicine.com. Thank you for being part of our yoga medicine community. The content of this podcast is not medical advice and is not meant to replace medical care. Please consult your healthcare provider to determine what is best for your unique healthcare needs.